Good evening and welcome everybody to the end of our week. Oh my goodness, how quickly does that go? And what a journey it has been when we think back to the start with Diandrea, bringing us into a bit of Taoism and ideas around alignment. And then we moved to Mick Collins, who gave us some really interesting ideas around co-eldering from a quantum perspective. We thought about meaning, information, resonance, moving into the middle of the week where we had Louise Livingston and the wisdom of heart-based practices. Let in Margaret. Heart-based practices and the wisdom from the stones. And oh gosh, that was, I don't know about you, Romy, that was a really emotional night for me, coming straight out of some supervision. And then it was almost like that supervision, the answer to the questions that were being asked to me, Louise beautifully provided. And then last night we went into Jack Hunter, greening the paranormal, these connections between the ecological and the parapsychological via our personal cosmologies and an ecological self. So it's been a beautiful week where these ideas seem to be passed down like the conch or something. We were joking, weren't we, on our weekend about the idea of passing the conch, passing the ideas, passing the batons along. And we are so pleased to have Leah Rampy join us to receive the baton, to bring our week to a celebratory close. And I'm really excited to have Leah here today. Our paths crossed over some time ago, and since then the awards for the book have keep coming. So congratulations. I believe in just the last day or so there's been another award for your book. So let's let Hayley in. And then let me do that formal bit, Leah, and then I shall pass over to you. Unless, of course, Romy, you're not stepping into your position, am I, tonight?
Nope, you're not stepping on any toes.
No toes, good. That's always a good place to be. So let me just welcome Leah. So Leah is a writer, a speaker, and retreat leader who weaves ecology, spirituality, personal stories, and practices to help others deepen their relationship to the natural world. She is an award-winning, I believe, 3 awards so far to Earth and Soul. Her book that is about reconnecting amid climate chaos, and I believe Leah will be speaking on this tonight. Looking at her bio, Leah's also in the process of authoring another book with Beth Norcross, Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees. So I shall be looking forward to that with much anticipation there. There are far too many things that Leah's achieved in her work with various different groups, setting up groups, etc. But I want to just bring out this where Leah is. She's based in Shepherdstown in the US. She lives with a husband in a co-housing communities where members collaborated to build and now run their village with a focus on community, environmental responsibility, and earth care. Leah, you are such an inspiration already, and you're living the life that many of us here, are striving to do. So with no more, let me welcome you and pass over the baton to you, Leah.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's really a delight to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed listening in through the week and, tip of the hat to the previous presenters. There certainly are some consistent themes that we're each carrying, which I find really heartening. I think probably the most relevant thing for you to know about me, with regard to what I'm going to speak about this evening for you, this afternoon for me, is that over a decade ago, I got more intently interested in what was going on with the changing climate. My daughter, who was a teenager then, she and I went to sit at the feet of Al Gore and learn to give his slideshow to be a member of a climate reality team. And so we were going around talking about climate change and what we needed to do about it. At the same time, I ran across an organization called Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. And so that added a dimension of looking at ecosystem species loss and a concern for how we might really honor, value, and reconnect with the living world around us. I've also spent a fair amount of time as a student and as a sometimes leader in contemplative living and leadership. And for 6 years was the executive director of Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formation, and that is their mission to offer that. So over the past 10 years, I've been trying to weave these themes together into a question that allows us to think about how we might live fully aware of, deeply connected to the world around us, holding the grief that we no doubt feel when we open our eyes to what's going on, and also the joy and wonder and beauty that exists in this world, and weaving our way into deeper connections and also a sense of how we might live fully alive and deeply connected in these times on the edge. So that was why I wrote the book, Earth and Soul, Reconnecting Amid Climate Chaos. It was not to write about climate change, but to simply say that that is the background in which we are living. And it is shaping us in some ways. Question is, how do we want to allow ourselves to be shaped? And how do we want to make a contribution in these incredibly challenging times? So I'd like to spend a little time telling you a story, offering just a little bit of a backdrop to my theory about our challenges of connection, to share a little bit about what might be some wisdom from the world around us that we might use to inform us how we can live in these times, and to think a little bit about where we go from here, and allow some time at the end for you to ask questions or make comments. So let's begin with the story. So the story takes place very close to you. It's a cave, not too distant, one that has been often searched for, but is never found, because it's a cave wherein sits an old woman who is weaving the world. So for most of a day, she sits at her loom and she weaves this fabric that is of exquisite beauty, remarkable design. And her whole attention is given over to the evolving design that is the world. Except for the few times where she needs to leave her weaving and walk to the back of the cave, because at the back of the cave is a cauldron. And in this huge cauldron that is simmering over the fire are all of the seeds and the roots that are the essence of this world's growth and vitality. And she cannot let those burn, because then who knows what might happen. So she occasionally must get up from her loom and walk to the back of the cave. Of course, she walks very slowly because she is very old. She makes her way to the back of the cave and slowly stirs the cauldron of soup. Now, when she leaves her loom, the black dog that has been lying at her feet, ostensibly sleeping, comes awake. And the dog notices this weaving and sees a little piece of thread and begins to tug at that piece of thread, pulling and pulling with his teeth until that thread comes out, and then another and another, until all of the weaving is lying on the floor, totally frayed. The woman makes her way back and immediately sees what the dog has done. She stops. She looks. Then she sits down and slowly she picks up a thread and begins to weave a new and even more beautiful design from the fabric that was left on the floor, frayed, torn apart by the dog, that is now being rewoven into a beautiful garment. Well, that's a story that Michael Mead, storyteller, has shared. It was originated with the White Mountain Apache and is told in dark times. So you might think that I'm going to tell you what that means, but that is not the essence of a good story, because a good story lives in many different forms and formats with many different meanings. So we'll see if and when the story might take us somewhere. Maybe it will be a carrier for us this evening, or maybe at another time. So we are probably feeling those losses that the old woman might have felt, of so much that has been frayed. So much that we might want to close our eyes to those losses and look away. It's hard to look on what's going on in the world right now. And so I do have a great deal of sympathy for people who feel that it's just too much to bear. And we certainly do see people who refuse to acknowledge or to look at what's happening to our climate and to our ecosystems. But of course, without our awareness, without our attention, then our connections continue to be frayed. And when our connections are frayed, we are lonely, heartbroken people. So on Monday, Diane Dreher spoke about studies that cite loneliness as a problem in many different countries. She mentioned the Surgeon General in the US, Vivek Murthy, who before COVID declared that loneliness was at epidemic proportions. And certainly with COVID, that has only gotten worse. We're born for connection. Consider the previous generations and how they lived in extended families and tribes and villages, deeply connected, living, working, playing, dancing, singing together, and feeding each other, depending on each other for survival. Exile would have been the ultimate punishment, because it was impossible to live alone. You could not survive. So even though we have the potential to live more distantly now, we are still wired for that level of connection, and we suffer without it. Loneliness correlates with anxiety, depression, dementia. There's an increase in cardiac stress for people who are lonely. And the Surgeon General has quoted studies that say loneliness has the same impact on our health as smoking 16 cigarettes a day. But we're not only wired for connection to each other, we are also wired for connection to this living world around us. It is in our genes. Generation upon generation knew what berries were safe to eat, where they could be found. They knew how to know what water was safe, where it could be found during times of drought, how to read the signs of weather. What were the ways in which they needed to look out for dangerous animals? Our ancestors understood the importance of mountains and rivers, of swamps, forests, prairies, marshlands, for their very survival depended upon understanding these webs of connection. But something has happened over the last few generations. And that level of connection to nature does not feel like it is present in our culture. In fact, that would be true if we were to look up the definition of nature in the Oxford Dictionary, which defines nature as the phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscapes, and other features and products of the earth, as opposed to humans or human creations, as opposed to humans. That's like a wow, we have defined nature as other than us. And that leads us to what Michael McGinnis in 1993 called species loneliness. So our culture has created this separation, this culture of separating ourselves from creation that leads us to both grief and hubris. We're breaking the web of life and breaking our hearts. Now, let me be clear, when I talk about culture, I'm talking about the kind of the dominant Western culture, and we want to acknowledge that there are many indigenous and earth-based cultures where that is not the case, and they have much to teach us. Defining land as inanimate allows it to become a property, a resource, an ecosystem service, an inanimate object that's ours for the taking. And that othering leads to human exceptionalism. We've othered the living world, created a hierarchy with humans at the top, superior to, therefore entitled to take from and use as we need to, in the way that Descartes spoke of humans being closer to God than other beings. You don't know how many of you might have read Amitav Ghosh's, what I consider to be a wonderful book, The Nutmeg's Curse. But Ghosh reaches into science fiction to pull out a term for what we have done to the land. He says, we have terraformed the land. We have drained swamps and aquifers, turned grasslands into plowed fields, fields into industrial parks and parking lots, cut large swaths of the Amazon forest so that we can plant crops to feed cattle so that we can have cheap beef. We clear-cut Canada's boreal forest for toilet paper, paved and dammed rivers. It's no small irony that the land that has been most drastically terraformed, in Ghosh's words, is also the places that are most susceptible to climate chaos. Of course, once the land and her inhabitants are others, then it's a really short step to othering people, devaluing people who are not like us. And we feel this heartbreak daily. This is, of course, not really possible to separate ourselves. This is what Albert Einstein called an optical illusion of consciousness. Born of the stars. We are all born of the stars, 13.8 billion years of a common family tree. We drink rivers and rain. Our breath comes from algae and trees. Our food comes from the photosynthesis of plants to feed our cells. Our microbiome determines our health, our thoughts, and our emotions. So we cannot really possibly hold this myth of separation that so dominates our Western culture. So we have work to do to reweave, reconnect, reclaim, repair those frayed threads that are holding on, binding us together as one in this living web. So how might we learn to reconnect? Well, I'm going to suggest, let me go to share screen here. Just have to get rid of the nice little menu across the top to get to the slideshow here. We live in edge times, times where we are like at the edge of this cliff, not sure when the waves are going to come in and wash the earth out from under us. We can't go back to the places from whence we've come, and it's not entirely clear how to go forward. So here we are on the edge. The question is, who has the wisdom to guide us? Well, I love to think that before our own times, there was this deep wisdom. Hildegard of Bingen, everything that is in the earth, on the earth, and under the earth is penetrated with connectedness, penetrated with relatedness. Hildegard, as you may know, was born in 1098, Benedictine abbess, saint, herbalist, composer, writer, mystic, polymath. And it was so clear to her, and perhaps the other people of her time, that earth was related. In the 900 years since Hildegard wrote that, we have come to the Oxford definition that says nature is separate from us. Let's see how we might be able to go back to learning from our elders who have been around far longer than we have. Well, these are coast redwoods. Can you see the person down at the bottom to give you a sense of scale? These are the tallest of trees. They often exceed 300 feet in height. That's taller than a 30-floor skyscraper. These trees live from Oregon to California within 50 miles of the coast, and they gather moisture from the fog. So this is a perfect place for them to live. Yet there is a challenge of this location. Because they are so close to the coast, they are subject to the intense storms that come in from the Pacific. You might think then that to survive storms, they must have an incredibly deep root system, but that is not the case. Their roots are very shallow. So how do they survive? They survive because their roots are interconnected. It is if they are holding hands. Now, these are above ground. There's much, much more of this intertwining connection underground. So when you think about that and the ways in which the trees support each other, can you imagine what it's like if simply one tree is cut or multiple trees are cut from that forest? So what are these coast redwoods imparting by way of wisdom? So we go to birch and fir. We'll go to Canada now. This is a subject of exploration by scientist Suzanne Simard, who wrote Finding the Mother Tree, which some of you may know of. She was fresh out of college when she started working in the forestry industry in British Columbia, and their practice was to clear cut trees they considered less valuable. So paper birch trees with their beautiful trunks were systematically cut down, because they felt that that would improve the growth of the Douglas fir that you see pictured here. And yet Simard was troubled that in spite of this extra care, allowing the fir to have more light, they just were not thriving. So ultimately she conducted scientific research as part of her doctoral program to explore what these trees needed to survive. And of course, what she found led us to a greater understanding of this entire network that is below ground, where the trees are allowed to trade nutrients and photosynthetic carbon and water with the mycorrhizal fungal network. What she found was that the leaves of when the birch and the fir grew together, the leaves of the fir would shade the birch said that backwards. The leaves of the birch would shade the fir in the summertime. But because they were shading it, the leaves also were photosynthesizing. And so they were able to send carbon to the birch I'm not saying that right. They were able to send photosynthesize. They were able to send carbon to the fir in the summertime when the fir was not able to reach the sun. And in the autumn, when this deciduous tree dropped its leaves, then the fir would send back carbon to the birch. So there was this wonderful exchange, this collaboration for mutual benefit. So if you eliminated the birch, you were eliminating this collaboration. And her research was published in the journal Nature, and that's what led to the word Wood Wide Web being the term for this network. We're going to go now to Germany, to the old growth beech forests. And this is some of the work of Peter Wohlleben. As in most forests, water and light are not equally distributed. So that makes it very difficult for some trees to thrive, of course. But scientists have been able to determine that those trees that have more access to water and to light will send nutrients to their fellow trees who have less. They are sharing so that everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Why would they do that? Well, when any tree is lost, it opens up the forest. And when the forest is opened up, moisture is lost, light gets into the floor, more shrubs grow, deer come in and graze, and it's doing so, they often harm the smaller trees. So it's very clear that in a healthy forest, even the weakest members have a place in supporting the health of the community. We'll go to the Scots pines. They can live for 600 to 700 years in a healthy forest because the older trees care for the young saplings by sending carbon and nutrients to them. And when a tree is elderly and more susceptible to loss, then the community shares nutrients with those elder trees. In an old growth pine forest, everyone belongs. Author Ben Rollins, who wrote Tree Line and traveled the vast boreal forest around the world, spoke about seeing a lone pine and how sad it made him feel. And indeed, Native Americans tell stories of solitary pines, whispering to them of their loneliness and asking the people to plant companions nearby. So these are examples of connection and collaboration. They might even be called living in communion in this deep wordless unity. But what about people? Do we belong anywhere in this network? Are we superfluous to ecosystems, as some people have contended? This is a picture of sweetgrass. Robin Wall Kimmerer, the botanist, author, member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, tells of a research story where women from 2 local tribes were confused about what might be causing some stands of sweetgrass to appear to be malnourished. And they were concerned that perhaps it had to do with their harvesting methods. So they set up experiments, and in this experiment, they had 3 separate stands of sweetgrass that were harvested in different ways. In one way, they harvested it by picking the grass, strand by strand, pinching it off carefully at the base, as the way one of the tribes harvested sweetgrass. In a second group, they yanked up a tuft and left a small gap in the sod. And in a third group, they left that alone. That was their control group. And then some poor graduate students had to count the grass in each group. And they counted how many were dead and living and how many were newly forming strands of grass. Well, when you begin to imagine what this must have been like, you think about, well, which method do you think was the most detrimental? Most people would guess that it's where the roots are yanked out whole and there's big empty spaces in the sweetgrass. But the failing plots were those that were unharvested. It was the control group that was choked with dead stems. Harvesting stimulated the growth and led to healthy stands of sweetgrass. It didn't seem to matter how the grass was harvested, only that it was. So a worldview that suggests that humans are outside of nature, that judges human interactions as largely negative, that says the best way to protect a dwindling species is always to leave it alone, may not be accurate. It probably is likely that we intercede too often and without taking time to understand the life of other beings and their needs. But yet we do have models of collaboration with the living world. For sweetgrass, native peoples and sweetgrass evolved together, part of the same ecosystem. We're learning now that this was true for forests and estuaries and buffaloes and prairies. So we know that from some cultures, living in harmony with attention to mutual well-being was and continues to be entirely possible and welcome. But to begin, even to begin such collaboration requires us to slow, to come to our senses, to hold intention of being a collaborator, to pay attention. Sounds like a spiritual practice, doesn't it? Also requires a change in mindset, a change from othering or the human exceptionalism that we know best, but rather invites us into a learning from the living world around us. Indigenous ethnobotanist, professor, and author Dr. Enrique Salmon writes about concentric ecology, this as an awareness that predominates in indigenous cultures. This is a belief, he says, that life in any environment is only viable when humans view the life around them as kin. This is a quote. Without human recognition of their role in the complexities of life in a place, life suffers and loses its sustainability. So I want to go to the words of the incredibly wonderful Joanna Macy, elder, environmentalist, Buddhist teacher, wise woman, who says 4 very simple sentences, but so profoundly important. It's all alive. It's all connected. It's all intelligent. It's all relatives. So if we could live with Joanna Macy's 4 sentences, what an incredible opportunity that would be. And how might the whole sense of perception shift? How might we end up being much more deeply connected? So I think as we reflect on the outward journey of connecting to the living world around us, this learning from, listening to, being with, being within, we might also notice that it necessitates a journey that is an inward journey as well, a journey of heart and soul. It's impossible to be deeply connected to the world around us without also an inward journey to heart and soul. And yet, I think we need to be clear that while that is a helpful way for us to talk about it, to try to make it clear that inward and outward are not really two separate, distinct practices or intentions, that is a seamless motion, intention. It's a single state of being. Because our language is imperfect, we can hold up it's an inward journey and an outward journey. And yet each enhances and invites the other. Well, on Wednesday, Louise Livingstone spoke of the powerful heart way of knowing. And she reminded us so clearly of this wisdom of the heart as she was speaking of her journey with the stones. She also mentioned the important fact that the heart takes in information before the brain does. The heart is there at the ready in a way to absorb information. A contemplative practice seeks not to explain, but to know, to experience the sacred. And the term mind and heart is often used to describe that, this dropping into the heart, which I think does not devalue the mind. It simply holds the mind as part of a larger whole. We need our minds to take in facts. We need our minds to examine, to reframe our understanding, to question our cultural assumptions, to wonder how we might connect more deeply. And we also need our heart to experience and hold all of that in wordless communion, because the heart knows how to learn and engage beyond words. We know that's true because we've had it happen to us. I'm sure you have, where you've sat in a room with someone who was very sad. And maybe even without telling you why they were sad, they were tearing up and you could see it writ large on their face. And you felt yourself mirroring that back. You felt tears coming to your eyes or a sadness engulfing you. This is the work of our heart that needs no words to deeply connect. So when we are in the presence of beauty and awe and wonder, we have the potential to lose that small self that is often ego-driven or is busy trying to figure out how we're going to fix our dinner or go shopping or get our work done. And it's lost in tomorrow and yesterday. But when we're in the presence of beauty, awe, and wonder, it's as if we're stopped in our tracks and our self shrinks to be part of this miraculous, beautiful whole. It is connected. So there is the importance of a pace that is often challenging for us in the world we live in. A pace that slows down, that opens, that allows the miraculous and the beautiful and the wonderful, that is so present all around us all the time, that doesn't require us to go on long trips to awe-inspiring places, that doesn't require that I go to the Coast Redwoods as much as I love them and take their pictures and sit underneath them to be awed by the incredible beauty of trees. Our heart also holds this endless capability for compassion and huge capacity for connections. Now, there's a challenge in this because connections open us to heartbreak, to loss, and to grief, and we will have to face into that. the more connected, the more deeply connected we are to the woods around us, the more deeply we feel when those are clear-cut. The more we have spent in close kinship to a mountaintop, the more tragic it is for us when that mountaintop is destroyed by enormous machinery for mountaintop removal. When we have fished and waded and played and skipped stones in a stream, we don't want that stream to be diverted and dried up. So our love and our connection also hold the risk of grief and sadness. And yet we cannot dull our senses to that loss, because in dulling our senses to loss, we also dull our senses to joy and beauty, to awe and wonder. It isn't a partial opportunity. We don't get to just say we leave out the bad parts. We are whole beings, and we are either numbed to our existence or we are engaged and alive and deeply connected. And in fact, it is the opening of our hearts more widely that allows us to hold the awe and wonder that helps us to deal with the challenge of loss. Well, when our hearts are broken open, we hold more. We hold more joy, loss, grief, beauty, awe, wonder, delight, sadness, more. And when we cultivate opening our spiritual heart and learn to rely on it, we can embrace the practice of bearing witness. This is a spiritual practice of being present to the loss of trees around you, in the same way you might be present to the loss of a dear friend or a relative, how you might sit vigil with someone or mourn them and share memories of them and as they have passed. We remember, though, that grief is best held in community, human community, and more than human community, because, of course, the world is grieving the losses too. Our earth is grieving the loss of ecosystems, mountains, rivers, and valleys. So rituals need to be made, rituals that will allow us to grieve together and to share the loss. So I want to make mention of soul, because we're talking about heart. Soul as in that true essence of who we are, who we have always been, who we may have layered over, but this truth of why we are here, whether we recognize it or not, or claim it or not, our lives are intricately intertwined with all other lives. And each contains the gifts that are needed for living in reciprocity with the world. I think a soul journey is key to discernment, to discerning and understanding more clearly what is ours to do. This is such a challenge for us in these times, because we see so much that we would like to address, that we would like to fix, that we would like to repair, that we would like to restore. And it is not all ours to do. There is something that is for each of us. There is not everything that is for each of us. I suspect a part of that good intention is based on forgetting that Earth herself has agency, that Earth herself is working to repair and restore and reweave. And that sometimes the gifts that we are offering may be protection, or simply holding that or understanding that more deeply. We don't have time to really speak of the full soul journey, the importance of sinking deeply into that well of the soul, the plunge that might take us to the dark night of the soul, that impasse where our only possible response, the one we fight against, is full surrender. So I would just say, suffice it to say that the more deeply we plumb the depths of our soul, the richer and more complex the fabric we are able to weave with this beautiful, tragic earth, because everything belongs. It's all alive. It's all connected. It's all intelligent. It's all relatives. So I want to allow time for questions, but I want to close this with a poem for you that maybe could be a marker for us, since we're speaking of trees and their wisdom and how they might guide us. But I also want to be clear that it doesn't have to be a tree. It can be stones, it can be birds, it can be any element of the living world, because we know they have been around so much longer than humans have, and have developed such incredible wisdom. But trees are special to me, and so I'm sticking with the trees here. This is a poem that you may know. You have to imagine yourself in an old growth forest, or near an old growth forest. And the children are standing around saying to the elders, well, what will I do if I'm lost? And David Wagner, the poet, answers this way: stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. Well, my hat's off to David Wagner, and it is a guidepost, I think, to remember what to do when we don't know what to do. Stand still. The forest is wise. Earth is wise. We must let him, her, them find us. Stand still. So with that, I will stop and give it to you, Lee, so that we can see if there are questions or somebody else wants to add their own wisdom or additional comments in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. I've asked everybody to unmute. If we could all do that now, please. And let's just take a moment to put our hands together and really say thank you for Leah for this time and this wisdom. Thank you very much. Wow, Leah, what an end to the week. Those words were an embrace. We deeply stirred the soul. My arms and the back of my neck are just alive with the electricity that you've moved and really touched me. There's such beauty and depth and heart in those words. I'm going to ask just a simple question to get things started, but I know other people have far more beautiful questions than possibly that I'm offering. Just like you said about going to the redwoods, it's not something you can always do. Sometimes we find ourselves in these busy lives, and you've given us a beautiful clue of standing still and slowing down. I just wondered if there were other hints or guidance from your journey that can help us to start feel like we're doing something, when sometimes this can feel such a vast and overwhelming and large task ahead of us. Any thoughts we'd greatly receive.
Sure. I would just say a few things that have occurred to me as I've been trying to understand how we live in these times. One would be, I have a friend who used to use the term, we don't want to run ahead of grace. So we don't want to run ahead of where we really are invited to be. There are so many ways that I could tell you how I have really made matters worse by rushing full speed ahead to try to fix something because I thought that I would be helping. So that to me is an example of kind of a human-centric come from place, right? The woods around me are second generation. They're not doing well. I see some, I see challenges. So what I want to do is I want to go in and fix it. And so I'm going to decide I'm going to pull out every invasive species or whatever. I mean, we could go on and make this up. The listening has to come first. The listening has to come first. What is being invited? This is a discernment. And discernment is part deep listening, and it's a lot also of watching what is already wanting to unfold, so that I can walk in and walk alongside of what is already wanting to happen. That's one thing I would say. The second is, for most of us, I suspect that the work we'll be called to will be pretty close in. I'm sure that there are some who are called to take the national or international stage, and I'm really grateful for that. For most of us, it will probably be close in. And by that, I mean, wherever you are is an absolutely wonderful place to start. So I led pilgrimages for quite a while, maybe, I don't know, 14 or 15 pilgrimages in various and sundry places around the world. They were beautiful, and I loved doing it. And it was great to take people to these spectacular places, and, places that were rich with, with beauty and with prayer and with many pilgrims who had trod there before. And I slowly came to understand that you could be a pilgrim anywhere, and that a pilgrimage to your own backyard could be just as rich, just as vibrant, just as meaningful as one that required a lot of, carbon burning to fly, to Scotland, to go to the Isle of Iona or whatever. So that's two things, I guess I would say. Slow down, come to your senses, drop to the heart, deep, deep listening. And that's that soul journey, to what am I called? What is mine to do? I cannot do everything. I cannot do everything. What is it that I am called to do now in this time?
Thank you so much. There is so much in that resonates. One of the things that's really interested me over the time is Dante's Divine Comedy. And some years ago, when writing some material on that, investigating it further, one of the messages that was spoken to me in that and that I didn't expect. And I do love those surprises that we get when we explore material, was about discernment, and that discernment takes time, that it's not a snap judgment, that actually something is required to unfold. And so thank you for the gift of reaffirming that message. Certainly that's what I'm hearing, or part of what I'm hearing in that. I could keep you all to myself. You're so beautiful what you're saying, but I'm going to open this up to everybody else. Please, if there's a question that you'd like to ask, unmic yourself, put your hand up, and please speak to Leah.
One of the things that I sort of wanted to, I think it was to make a comment on, because it was something that really touched me. Well, actually the whole talk touched me, but this sort of resonated because of personal reasons. But it was when you were talking about loss and grieving, and about there being certain rituals around this, and the collective rituals, and how we've lost those rituals. And it just made me think as well, quite recently, there's something at the moment that is all in social media, on the television, and it's been around for a while, which is the planning your funeral care beforehand. And it's like an instant funeral. So you pay for it. It's instant cremation. So there's no service, there's nothing at all. So you die, your relative gets in touch with this telephone number, they come and take your body away, do what is necessary, and then they send you the ashes in the post. And
I've missed all of that.
Oh, it's very big in Britain, and it's there. There's one. I mean, my father's dying at the moment, so he's wanted, that's what he wants. He doesn't want anything else. But there's a whole process of grieving that needs to happen. And I just thought how reflective it is that if we are doing that to humans now, it's almost as a result of what we've been doing to nature for so long, that actually it's come all the way down through nature to now get to the human point, where we're actually now doing it to ourselves, not realizing that we've been doing it to ourselves for a very, very long time as a part of nature. And that's when you were talking, I could really see that journey to, and the letting go of the rituals that we need, the letting go of the collectiveness and the importance. So thank you for that. That really, really touched me, and scared me as well at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right that once we start othering, then where does that stop? So that idea that we are separate has been carried to such an extreme. So that's one. And then the other is just to mention that, because I brought up Joanna Macy and her wise work, she has worked on rituals. And so the work that reconnects, if you Google the work that reconnects, you would find some of the rituals that they use and practices that this community, and it's not a physical community, but people who are following her and engaged in the practice of the work that reconnects. They're beautiful rituals, but we will probably have to invent a lot of our own, because I don't know what a ritual is for a clear-cut forest, for instance. I will say that there's a really interesting practice that Trebby Johnson has of Radical Joy for Hard Times is her book. And she invites people to go to a clear-cut forest, for instance, and to sit there until the beauty, to sit there with the loss until the beauty arrives. And then they take whatever is around, maybe burnt pieces of stick or stones or whatever, and make a bird, the image of a bird. And once a year, she invites people to do this around the world. to go to some place that has been ravaged and to create this beauty and honoring what's been lost.
I think that's absolutely beautiful, because there's an honoring and a cherishing what has, and yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I think Andy has a hand up.
I do indeed, yes. Thank you, Leah, for what is absolutely a very touching and very emotion-provoking talk. It reminds me of how blessed I am to have my own mini forest around my own house. But it also is, and I think Leah and I had this conversation quite recently, it's very life-affirming to know that my own little practices of observing, I've been here for 5 years now, and I couldn't bring myself to bulldoze my way through the land, if that makes sense. I had to sit with the land. I had to study what was where, what was doing what, which trees were talking to which trees. The fact that my giant oak decided it was trying to eat my roof. We had a long conversation, the oak and I, about that. And, we came to an understanding that I had to chop off one of her arms, but she was most forgiving about it. And consequently, I have lots of baby oaks that I'm now trying to bonsai in her honor. But it was only one limb that I took off her. But I think what I've taken from it is, if you take the time to respect what we have. Where I am, my particular place has been neglected for a very, very long time, and I suffer the opposite problem. Things have been stifled through overgrowth. So I'm very selective when I take out things, and I use an arborist to guide me, because in fact the trees, whilst they do communicate, obviously, and I've always believed that, and obviously it was very lovely to see that the swapping of the carbon dioxide, that was a fairly recent discovery, wasn't it? And they talk through the mycelium as well, I understand.
Right.
So thank you. It's just reaffirmed that we are just visitors here, and we need to honor what is and manage it with respect and understanding. So thank you. That was lovely. Really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for that wonderful example of listening first. That's permaculture principle, right? I mean, that's where you begin in permaculture, is the listening. And you might take a year before you decide what to, your first step is with the land on which you are living. And I thought it was funny, you brought it up too, but when you said that, that what the trees had to say, I mean, we didn't used to really understand that they are talking to each other, maybe not in the English language, but they are talking to each other, right? And exchanging information. And that when we're in there, pulling out various and sundry plants, we're disrupting those networks. So it's, Merlin Sheldrake, Suzanne Simard, I mean, they've just given us wonderful insight into this incredible life that's below ground.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Really, really is lovely. I'll try and sneak one of the baby oaks back. Baby bonsai.
Yeah.
Just listening to that conversation, do you think, Leah, that we need to change our language when talking about nature? When listening to Angie there, she recognized the individuals, the life, the personhood of the other as living, sentient, intelligent beings. And that just makes me think, is there something, can we do this? Is this, I've stopped and passed to you.
Well, I think that's right. I mentioned Enrique Salmon and the concept of concentric ecology, and certainly Robin Wall Kimmerer writes a whole chapter and models it for us in Braiding Sweetgrass to talk about kinship. Part of what that does when we change the language is that we begin to understand that we are not at the top of the pyramid, but rather we are, as she would say, the younger brothers and sisters of this entire wonderful, expansive web of life. And so as younger brothers and sisters, we are the least knowledgeable. We have the most to learn from the world around us. And so she uses the term kin. I am trying to do that. You mentioned that we have a book coming out. Beth Norcross, my colleague, and I have taught a class for 5 years now, I guess, on the spiritual wisdom of trees. And we have a book coming out on that in the spring of 25. As we wrote the book, we made a concerted decision to speak of he, she, or they when we wrote about the trees, because, by the way, trees are male, female, or they. So it isn't, it's not really that far-fetched, but it does change a perspective. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. We're so wrapped in a culture of separation that I think we have to look at language and actions and so on that help us, get our heads in a little bit different place.
Beautiful. I'm really excited and looking forward to that book. So in the folder on the wish list for 2025. Looking at time, we've got probably 1 or 2 more questions. So please, if you've got a burning question, this is your chance.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. Thank you very much for that. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. My computer told me I had a virus in it just before I had to shut it down and come back again. That was just what I needed. So it was beautiful to come in just as you began your story, because not only was it a wonderful story, but it was just, I loved the flow and the tone that you had. So I think stories are really, really important. And so that was a great way for me to come back into this. So thank you for that, and for the whole talk. I was particularly struck by your image at the beginning of your slides of living on the edge, partly because that spoke to me, because I live in the southwest of England, and that's very like the coastline around the coast of Cornwall. And that thought about being on the edge of it and not being able to go back, there were several images that came to mind. One was an image from an educator called Stephen Brookfield, who writes a lot about reflective practice, critical reflection. And one of the dangers of it, he talks about, I don't know the names of these American creatures, but there's some bird which can actually run very fast after something, and it follows something, and whatever it's following is able to fly, goes off the edge of the cliff, and this particular creature goes off the edge and suddenly realizes that it can't fly. So there is this awful moment where you've actually left behind what was secure, what you knew, and there is total uncertainty about what you're going to meet now you've let go of it. And I think that notion of living with uncertainty seems to be something that we all need to kind of cultivate ways of doing that at the moment. Because the other thing that image reminded me of was Richard Bach's Jonathan Living's Seagull, where when you actually do have the courage to take the plunge, you often will find that you can fly. There is a way to go. And that sort of led me into your thoughts about what is it that I'm called to do when what is this plunge that I need to take? And I just looked up the quotation from another educator called Parker Palmer, whose work I love. He talks about, we constantly ask the what question, what shall we do? And then sometimes we ask, how shall we do it? And even less often we ask, why should we be doing it? And very, very rarely do we say, who is the person who's doing it? And he actually says, we are like plants full of tropisms, and it just seemed to resonate with your talk about nature and how we are actually part of it. He says we're full of tropisms that draw us towards certain experiences and repel us from others. if we can learn to read our own responses to our own experiences, a text we are writing unconsciously every day we spend on earth, we will receive the guidance we need to live more authentic lives. And that just seemed to chime in so much with what you were saying. So I hope you didn't mind me bringing that in.
Oh, that's terrific, Cheryl. What book is that in?
That's,
Do you know?
I think it's from The Courage to Teach.
Okay.
Palmer.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
But,
Yeah, I'm a fan of Parker Palmer too.
Okay. Well, it's either
But I don't know that one. Yeah.
it's either The Courage to Teach or Let Your Life Speak, one of the two. I think if you actually Googled that quotation, "We are like plants full of tropisms," it would probably bring it up.
Yeah, he's terrific, isn't he? You know, I think of his quote about the soul is like a deer. It's very shy and it's very hard to invite it to come out into the open. So thank you. That's a terrific quote. Thank you for sharing
I just
that.
I thought I should be able to find this reference. It is Let Your Life Speak,
I
Listen
got it.
to the Voice of Vocation, published in 2000.
Yeah. I've got that on my shelf. I will try to find that one. Thank you for that. I really appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, I think, you know, that's part of so the book I wrote, Earth and Soul, I was really intentional about that, you know, because I think that the soul journey is so important, and the soul journey is to who we are, right? Who we have always been and have forgotten, or have layered over, or have let, kind of the world sweep us into a particular direction. But there's a who there, and that the sense that I understand is that's true for us. You know, the what may change, but the who, you know, the who we are called to be has a resonance throughout our life. So we are bridge builders, and what bridge we're called to build may not look the same every time, but that is why I am here, to be a bridge builder. So what is it that each of us are invited into, I think, is so important. We get so, well, not only frustrated, but defeated when we think that everything is ours to do. So yeah, thank you. But I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that quote.
Beautiful, thank you. Anybody else, anything that they'd like to share or say? In that case, then, perhaps if anybody hasn't had that opportunity, I could pass on any messages or questions to you, Leah, in the future. But once again, could we unmute ourselves, please, and really put our hands together, and once more, from our hearts, really thank Leah for closing this ceremony, closing this week for us. It's like a ceremony. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm really honored to be with you.
Thank
It
you.
was great. Thanks, Leah. Brilliant.
Thank you, Lee. I've only been able to come to a couple of these, but I wish I'd been able to come to the whole series, but I've certainly enjoyed these last two. So thank you.